You want your child to see that not only are you talking about this, but that you are actively doing things to try and combat racism.
You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode number 227. Today, we're talking about how to talk to kids about racial injustice with Doctors Marietta Collins and Ann Hazzard. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast. Here, it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark-Field's Mindful Mama mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting course and membership, and I'm the author of Raising Good Humans, a mindful guide to breaking the cycle of reactive parenting and raising kind, confident kids. Welcome to the podcast, my dear friend. I hope this finds you well. I am so happy for you to be here today. We have an amazing episode. We are going to be talking about how to talk about racial injustice. The protests around the world after the murder of George Floyd have shown us parents that we really need to be talking to our kids about racial inequality. But how do we do it, right? Many white parents feel really awkward and uncomfortable bringing it up at all. So in this episode, Doctors Marietta Collins and Ann Hazzard, who co-authored the book, Something Happened in My Town, share with us about how to talk to kids about this. And Ann Hazzard, Ph.D., is a clinical psychologist, formerly on the faculty of Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and she is the co-author of Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice. And Marietta Collins, PhD, is also a clinical psychologist, and she is at Morehouse School of Medicine, and she is also co-author of Something Happened in Our Town. So I want you to listen for some really important things. How little kids can really understand concepts of racism and fairness. And they also talk about how you are going to say the wrong thing, and that's okay. We're still got to talk about it. And we can start with questions. Why do you think that might happen? So this is going to be a powerful episode. I hope this episode is a powerful resource for you. It's important. It's really, really important that we talk about this. We've seen this. Not talking about these things, it has led to violence. Silence is violence. So it starts in our homes. And so I invite you to go on this journey with me. And before we dive in, I want to let you know that the Mindful Parenting Teacher Training is going to be opening, and I'm so excited. People are reaching out, and I'm going to be certifying people to teach mindful parenting, how to calm our reactivity, and also then what to say to our kids to create cooperation in person in their communities. So exciting. So while we get our webpage up about this, in the meantime, if you're interested, you can email me at hunter@mindfulmamamentor.com. And that's all I have to share with you about right now. I hope that you're safe. I hope that you're well. And let's take these really, really challenging times and make them teachers to us, right? This is what we can do. So join me at the table as I talk to Doctors Marietta Collins and Ann Hazzard. Thank you, Marietta and Ann, so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
I'm so glad to find you. And your book, Something Happened in Our Town, is amazing. I was wondering if you would be interested in describing the book to us. Maybe Marietta, do you want to start us off? Describe the book and maybe how you guys came about doing it a little bit.
Okay, sure. Again, the name of the book is Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice. And it's the story of two families, a white family and a Black family. The first sentence of the book is something happened in our town, I believe. Something bad happened in our town. The grown-ups are talking about it. They don't think the kids knew. And the kids in this case are elementary age kids, probably around, I would say, kindergarten to first grade. But the kids did know because they overheard the grown-ups talking about it, which is certainly very typical. So both of the kids, there's a white girl and a Black boy, go home and talk to their families about what they overheard. And they say, why did the police shoot that Black man? And that's what it's about. And the families are, of course, a bit surprised that they even know this. And each family explains from the perspective of their races exactly. They talk about racism. They talk about the fact that the police shot the Black man and it was a mistake. And the white families explain what a Black man is to this little white girl because she thinks he looks brown, not Black. And she has an older sibling who's a sister who kind of knows it all. She's a teenager and she talks, kind of initiates to talk about race. They go on and they talk about racism. They talk about slavery. And what we did, we struggled as psychologists to try to figure out how to explain racism to young kids. And the word that we finally came up with was fair, because most kids, all kids, understand what it means to be treated fairly versus unfairly. So we explained racism in terms of people being treated unfairly based upon the way they looked, their race. So the white family explains, how racism developed as a result of slavery and that they, in fact, owned slaves and that was wrong. The Black family does the same thing. They talk about racism from the perspective of a Black family and being slaves and how hard that was for them. They also talk about the civil rights movement and how civil rights helped them to be able to overcome slavery. The dad has a lot of emotions about, how badly it felt, to as a Black man in America to be mistreated. The young boy also has an older brother who says, I could just be stopped because I'm Black. I bet that they wouldn't have stopped me if I were white. So, it's a very, I guess I'd say moving and open story with each parent trying to really encourage their kids to stand up for people who are treated unfairly. They gave examples. Suppose you were with a little girl, suppose you were in class and everybody in class was invited to a birthday party. How would you feel about that? Okay. Little girl, she said she would feel sad. She would feel bad about it. It would be unfair. Okay. And the little boy talks with his older brother about how he had to stand up for him because people were teasing him that he wore glasses. Okay. So that really does provide an opportunity for both kids who are in the same classroom at school to really be able to show what they learned from their parents. When a new student joins their class, this new student appears in the illustrations to be of Indian descent. And we don't specify, if he's Eastern Indian or if he's Spanish. We don't specify any of that. We just say that, he doesn't he doesn't seem to speak the language very well. And it's to the point where the kids are going outside for recess and everybody's choosing people to be on their soccer teams. And the team captains decide not to choose the new kid because they don't think he could play very well at all. And they're really, making statements based upon how he looks, that are unfair. And both of the kids, the girl and the boy, main characters, they step up for the new kid because it's not fair that he's being treated like that. And in that way, they create a new pattern of friendships, in their school. One thing we did very early on in the book was talk about the pattern of racism as a bad habit, a habit that started back in slavery and that's continued throughout present day. And so the boy and the girl decide they want to establish a new habit of being open and friendly and fair to everyone, not based upon the way they look. So that is basically the story.
I think it's brilliant because it's it's like, how do we have these conversations? It's a big question we're having is, how do we have these conversations? And we walk through two different families having these conversations. And the whole idea of us having these different perspectives is so valuable. The perspective of the adolescent, brother or sister is so valuable, of the dad, of all and the way you guys set it up with these different perspectives, it really makes it an invaluable resource.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to talk about these ideas, and I think that books and these are resources like your book, which unfortunately is not available right now because it's in such high demand. But there are so many books and things that are resources are a great way for us to start. But I know that right now we've seen so much suffering. People's hearts are breaking. People are angry, and rightfully so. There's so much happening all around the world. The world is acknowledging the incredible suffering that the Black and brown people in America have been undergoing for so long. And we're all waking up to that. And I'm seeing people wake up to it in many, many different ways. And in my friend circles and my clients in all kinds of different ways. And I know people are saying, we need to talk about this with our kids. Like, obviously we need to talk about this with our kids, because when we don't talk about it, we're sending this message that it's like, this is something that's so horrible that we shouldn't even talk about it. Right. And so we're figuring out that we have to talk about it. But people, I know some of the questions, as I've asked people about this, like people feel uncomfortable about when to bring this up. How old should our kids be to bring this up? White families feel like I feel trouble finding the telling other people's stories, right? Or not having the context, right, to sort of bring this up again. So let's just to open up this conversation about what are some of the ways. I mean, let's start it with age. Like, what are some of the ages where it's important, and what age is your book geared toward, and what age should we start talking about these issues with kids?
Children are going to notice racial differences pretty young, 2 or 3, because they're based on skin color and hair and things that are noticeable. And just like kids notice boy versus girl, although maybe there's a little more gender neutrality going on and it may not be so obvious anymore, but kids are interested in that stuff, and they're going to bring it up and ask, very innocent questions. Well, why is that boy's skin brown? Part of what's happened in the past is that I think mostly white parents have been so anxious about this area that they have often shushed kids from just asking those questions and given the message that you mentioned, that there's something so scary or so taboo about talking about this. So at an early age, at the 3 and 4-year-old age, what we encourage parents to do is just talk about that openly in a matter-of-fact way. That, people have different skin colors, that depends on, who their parents were and their ancestors and where they lived. And, depending on whether you've got a little junior scientist, you can teach them about melanin and, how that different amounts of melanin, protect you from the sun. So that's, lesson number 1 is just respond to children's observations, in a matter-of-fact way. And then I think...
thinking about that, like, what if, we live in pretty segregated worlds, right? Like some kids are, I'm thinking about like suburban kids, they may not encounter people of different races for a long time. So if you're say a white family in that situation, would you encourage people what would you say, I guess, in that case? Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. We are supported by Grassroots Farmers Cooperative. So it's June, and here in Delaware, we are wanting to cook out. My daughter's really into camping, and for me, I'm really conscious and aware of like where I get my meat, and I don't want to be supporting factory farms. I want to be really conscious and thoughtful about how I get my meat, and I also want it to taste good. So, with all of the concerns about meat right now, from processing conditions to supply chain issues, I want you to know that there is a better way to source our meat. Grassroots Farmers Cooperative. I am so impressed with them because they are totally committed to transparency from pasture to plate. They even have a QR code on each piece of meat that you can track its exact source. Grassroots Farmers Cooperative is made up of small, U.S.-based family farms who handle every part of the meat production process, which makes them a resilient, trustworthy source for the meat with less risk for disruption in the supply chain. And they are very thoughtfully caring for their land and their animals, which means a lot to me as somebody who's really conscious about not wanting to eat like tons of inhumane meat that's sourced from a terrible place. The Grassroots Farmers Cooperative is incredibly thoughtful about their land care and their animals. They replenish valuable nutrients in the soil, and they're raising their animals on pastures in microherds. They prioritize the life of their animals, employee welfare, and food safety, which results in delicious, nutrient-rich meat from a source you can trust. We made burgers the other night, and this is what my 13-year-old had to say.
Those were good burgers.
I invite you to order Grassroots Farmers Cooperative today. No subscription is required. And right now, they're giving our listeners a special limited time offer, $40 off, plus free shipping. So please go to grassrootscoop.com/hunter to get the full details and order today. Go now. That's grassrootscoop.com/hunter. I am proud to have them as my sponsor, and I feel really good about ordering their meat. And I hope you will too. Support this podcast and get amazing meat by ordering from Grassroots Farmers Co-op. That's grassrootscoop.com/hunter.
Well, you led into my point number 2 perfectly. And in any case, and particularly in the case if you're in a very segregated environment, adding diversity to the children's books that you're reading to your child, to the cartoons you're putting out there for your child to watch is another great way to communicate, hey, isn't it interesting? There's all these different kinds of people from different places, and they're experiencing a lot of the same feelings and reactions you might be, but also some different experiences. So that's another thing that one can do early on, is just to expose and children and celebrate diversity, and highlight both differences and similarities in experiences of children with different skin colors or other situations.
For sure, I would agree 100%. Children's books are excellent. What does the artwork look like in your home? Also, what does your friendship group look like? What's really important is that children see you interacting in environments where diversity is prevalent, so that you not only talk the talk, but you also walk the walk. There are lots of different kinds of festivals that occur in Atlanta, going to different festivals, and just celebrating the wonderful differences in all the different cultures, be it food, be it artwork. But, again, we think it's important for kids to kind of see you interacting in a really positive and ongoing way with people of diverse races and ethnicities.
And you're right, Hunter, that's a challenge in our society, because residential and school segregation has been a part of our society, and that's one aspect of the systemic racism that's been with us forever. But parents that are serious about wanting to raise children in an anti-racist in a way, even if they live in a somewhat, I mean, first of all, you think maybe about diversity when you're choosing where you live, but even if you're pretty ensconced in a neighborhood that's not very diverse, think about where your child's going to go to do extracurricular activities. Maybe drive a little further to provide some diversity. And, Marietta mentioned other cultural and sort of events you can do to have greater exposure.
Yeah. And so part of, it's interesting as the protests have happened around the world, I've been having my own wake ups and realizations and things like that. And thinking about this, having that diversity in our own lives, and just kind of seeing, I guess, how important it is, right? Like we're realizing that, it's not just something that we can kind of push aside, right? Like we're seeing that this is something incredibly important. This is another one of these hard conversations we have to have, like about sex and sexuality and et cetera. Like this is probably another one that and also that I guess my own wake up that I wanted to refer to is that whole idea that I'm thinking about what being, I guess I was listening to the podcast with, Ibrahim Kendi, and I forget his name, about how to be an anti-racist, and talking about how there's not like a neutral ground here, right? Like it's something that you have to be active about. It's something that if we want to change a generational pattern, that this isn't something that we can really ignore. It's something that we do have to be active about, and we do have to kind of make a priority, a little bit, at least more of a priority probably than most people are making.
Yes, because I think if parents, especially white parents, don't talk about that racial injustice exists and that they don't agree with that, and we want to work together as a family to do our part in changing things. If you don't talk about that, you are by default communicating that you're okay with how things are. It's okay with you. And children get that message that it's not important.
I would agree 100%. I would even say it a bit more bluntly that if you aren't actively fighting against racism, you're part of the problem. You're allowing it to continue. And it's also important to give the message to parents that not only did these things happen in our past, but they are continuing to happen. And sometimes parents will think that, especially I would say white parents, that they don't want to destroy their child's innocence. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But Black parents typically have these conversations with their children at very early ages. They continue to have these conversations, out of necessity from a very young age, because again, you want your child to be aware of the fact that even though they're cute, by default, as they get older, some people are going to see them as a Black boy or a Black girl or a Black man or a Black woman, and that can be threatening to them. So it's really important to, I think, from the very, very beginning, to actively, be involved, in anti-racist movements, protests. There are some protests that are appropriate for families and children.
Mm-hmm.
There are some activities that you can want your child to see. Not only are you talking about this, but that you are actively doing things to try and combat racism. Sometimes it can be scary. Children can develop anxieties and fears about this. And it's important for parents to let them know that we're working very hard to make this world a better place. We're working very hard to try to make sure that this does not continue.
Yeah. I mean, I had Nefertiti Austin on the podcast a while back, who wrote a wonderful book called Motherhood So White, and she was just explaining her experience of raising her son, and that she told the story of that he was they're playing with Nerf guns out in the front yard of a 7-year-old birthday party, and she had to explain to her friend that she couldn't allow her son to play with Nerf guns in the front yard because it could be dangerous to him. And it's so heartbreaking, and it's just such a wake-up call. And it's interesting because there are people who teach for parents to be more mindful that that we want to protect our kids from the news, right? We want to preserve their innocence. And so many of us like hold both of these in the same hand, right? Like, how do we balance that? Like, we don't want to, like, we know that kids are so anxious these days, right? Like, college kids are so anxious, like anxiety's on the rise. So how do we balance kind of telling having these conversations with also maybe protecting to their innocence to a degree that, I mean, where would you sit? How would you walk that line, I suppose, if you had little kids right now? Go ahead, Anne.
I don't think it's appropriate to show graphic images of violence or to discuss details of some types of violent acts with young kids. But I really think you can talk about, and we know because we've talked to lots of kids in the context of reading our book, you can talk to young kids about Black people and brown people being treated unfairly and give examples of slavery. I mean, kids can understand those things without being traumatized. They can understand that it's not fair for a person to own another person, or it's not fair for a person to be forced to work and not get any pay. It's not fair for a person not to be able to go to the same schools as a person with a different skin color. So they can understand all of those concepts in the context of fairness. Maintaining, as Marietta said, maintaining white children's innocence is lying to them about the world. I think you can be honest with children about some of the difficult realities of the world without traumatizing them. And you can still, I mean, our book is a very hopeful book at the end. You can still, children will still maintain their wonder about the world. I mean, that's one aspect of children's innocence is just they notice the little things that we've forgotten were wonderful, and they call that to our attention. They'll still have all that, but let's harness children. Another part of children's innocence is they can see straight through to the core of things sometimes. They'll see what's really important. So they'll see, I mean, if we open the conversation, they see very clearly how unfair this is. So let's harness that energy young, because otherwise kids notice disparities and they notice stereotypes. And if they don't have somebody talking with them about, hey, okay, let's say a white kid that lives in an upper middle class white neighborhood drives through a poorer neighborhood that's mostly brown. I mean, there's a lot of wrong conclusions a child can draw from that if nobody's talking to him about how that might have come to be, what that's about, the history of that.
And again, I'm sorry, Anne, to interrupt you, but I was going to say, and again, to answer your question, Hunter, the conversations that you're going to have with your child are going to be driven by their questions, okay? And you're going to address them in a developmentally appropriate way, okay? You're going to make sure that you're using terms that they can understand, and you're going to, again, follow their lead, as they try to understand, what is happening and what is going on around them.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. This episode is sponsored by KiwiCo. I love, love, love the KiwiCo Tinker Crates and Eureka Crate. They are amazing. Recently, my daughter Sora and I mean, we're home in quarantine. We have not that much to do. We want to have some time away from screens and on those rainy days. What do you do with them that's engaging and educational and cool? And the Tinker Crate is amazing. My daughter recently did this arcade catapult thing, and she created it herself, and she's learning about how the rubber bands pull back and propel these things through the air. It is so cool. I've never seen something so cool for kids. And you'll want them to have your child, your grandchild, your niece, or little cousin learning from home. I was even really surprised at how much we loved this. So with KiwiCo Crates, your child can get a super cool hands-on science and art projects delivered to their door every single month. And what kid doesn't love to get mail? You'll be so surprised at how high quality the materials are too. These are real engineering, science, and art projects for children. And this is how we do our part to encourage our children to be innovators and creative thinkers. And they won't believe what they can build and accomplish with KiwiCo. And when they're finished, watch their confidence be as big as their smile. KiwiCo has 7 lines for kids of all ages. Panda crates for kids ages 0 to 2, koala crates for kids ages 3 to 4, kiwi crate for 5 to 8, atlas crate for 6 to 11, doodle crate for 9 to 16, and tinker crate for 9 to 16, and eureka crate. And we love ours. There's no commitment, so you can pause or cancel anytime. KiwiCo is redefining play with hands-on projects that build confidence, creativity, and critical thinking skills. There's something for every kid or kid at heart at KiwiCo. Get your first month free on select crates at kiwico.com/hunter. That's KIWICO.com/hunter.
I guess that's a really good point, Marietta, is that we have... It's not that we're giving lectures. Most conversations should be starting out with, why do you think that might happen or might have happened, or how do you think that child might feel? And then you can really know what your child understands or doesn't understand, and have a good sense about where to guide the conversation.
All right. But I guess, follow their lead and follow their questions. But similarly, like sex and sexuality, if they're not asking questions, we're not just going to ignore them. We're going to have maybe some resources or things around to have a catalyst for the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yes, for sure. And, it doesn't have to be a really big deal. It could be, again, you're at a grocery store with your kids, and they may notice a Black or brown person and say, oh, why is that person's skin, why is that person so dirty? Why didn't they take a bath? It's a perfect opportunity to say that person did take a bath. Their skin is a different color, because, Ann mentioned melanin, we're all different shades. That person is brown, you are light tan. There are all kinds of situations where you can begin to, open up the conversation. But, and again, by labeling, that lady, look at the lady across the street. Do you mean the Black woman, the brown woman with the yellow scarf on? Again, if it's a part of your ongoing conversations, you don't have to wait, until something happens, to start to talk about these issues with your children.
Now, what about like the idea of sort of like otherness that is inherent in this kind of thing? Like, so for instance, my nieces are Black girls. They're and sometimes I'm hanging out with them, and I notice if we're at the beach, they're the only, in Rhode Island anyway, they're the only Black girls on this whole beach. And I feel for them, and I feel awkward and uncomfortable. Like, they're honestly just like playing with their cousins. But I notice that otherness, and I don't know if they do, and I don't know if if there would be a conversation to start there or anything. I mean, just as an example, for instance, like when we find ourselves in situations that are sort of racially awkward like this, like, do you have any advice for us, I guess, as parents in some moments like this? Either Anne or Marietta Tate. I'm not sure who. Anne, what do you think?
Yeah, Anne, why don't you go?
I think maybe speaking from your heart,
Mm-hmm.
saying, I felt kind of awkward at the beach today because I noticed that there were no other brown people there. Was that awkward for you or not a big deal? How'd you feel? I mean, that's a good way to start.
It's like name it to tame it, right? Like those awkward, uncomfortable
I hadn't heard
feelings
that phrase,
come
but
up.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's what we teach about, and like that mindfulness, right? It's like you name it to tame it. Like, this is here. Hello, I'm feeling annoyed right now. That's here, and it helps to kind of lessen it. Similar kind of thing.
And it opens the door, because they may have been thinking about that and kind of wondering about it, but didn't know how to put words to it. But what you're doing is you're opening the door. And, I noticed that it kind of made me feel uncomfortable. How did you feel? Or it was kind of awkward. And you're giving them the message that it's okay to talk about these things, and that, no, it's not just you, who had these strange feelings, and that I'm your aunt. You can talk to me about these things. And I noticed them too. And, we want to, make sure that you feel okay in the environments that we're taking you in. And, and another piece is to try and look at the kinds of environments that you're taking your children into, and try to strive for environments that are as diverse as possible. But again, ignoring the reality of what is there sends a message that maybe I can't talk about this, or, is it me? Or, so I would certainly encourage you to call it what it is.
So get over our awkwardness, name what's happening.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the reasons so many white parents, feel awkward about talking about race is they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And the point, you are going to say the wrong thing. You are going to flub up. But that's okay. I mean, we flub up about all sorts of things as parents, as long as you have a good heart and are willing to learn from your mistakes and acknowledge them, because this isn't just one conversation. This is a conversation that needs to happen over and over again, because it comes up in so many different ways in our lives together in a multicultural society. So you'll have a chance. You'll have a redo chance.
Yeah, I guess with our kids, I think probably a lot of people feel awkward in a lot of ways, and because I think maybe as speaking from experience I've talked about with my friends who are white friends, saying that we don't want to add any more hurt. We don't want to add any more, any more a discomfort and anger, or whatever. We don't want to add to the problem so people feel uncomfortable saying anything.
But I would say we've been trying that approach for
it's not working.
And it doesn't work. We have a fancy term in psychology: error of commission and error of omission. Error of commission is when you do something. So certainly calling somebody a terrible racial name, that's an error of commission. But an error of omission is not doing something and not talking about racism and not doing anything about, not doing our part to solve a problem we created as white people, is hurting a lot of people, a lot of brown people. That's so it's just as hurtful to not do something.
Okay,
it's
so
more hurtful in some cases.
Let's shift to this when our kids are older. What if we have adolescents? If we have teens and adolescents? How let's imagine for the listener who maybe has not been having these conversations because they've been feeling really awkward. How do how can people start these conversations and start to change things at that age?
I'll speak from the perspective again of a Black parent primarily, because we've been having these conversations with our kids, hopefully, from the time they were very young, because we don't have the, as I say, the privilege of not having these conversations with kids. And by the time Black, I'll say, adolescents and preteens reach that developmental stage, they're starting to be even more aware of their racial identities. They're starting to try to make decisions for themselves in terms of how to handle certain situations. They probably have had to and have encountered situations where someone may have made a remark, or they may have heard a racist comment. So trying to figure out how to handle that is something that they've already started to grapple with. Okay. And, for white kids, and certainly, and you can speak to this, but they may come home, let's say, and say that they, you may overhear them repeat a racist term. You may, just in listening to them, observe their attitudes about certain things. And certainly you want to not overlook that, but to start talking about that. And again, from the perspective of, well, do you know what that means? Where did you hear that? And how would you feel if someone called you that name? And, hopefully what you've been doing as a parent is involving your child in diverse groups, be it a sports team, be it a club, be it, some kind of religious organization, if their schooling, is different. I'm also thinking that a lot of times in that particular age group, that's where kids may, for the first time, and start to go to school, with people of different races. It may have been the case that earlier on in their preschool years and their elementary school years, they were primarily white for whatever reason, or all Black for whatever reason. But usually when you move into the middle and high school ages, that's when diversity within education first happens. So, talking to your kid about that, especially, as a Black mom, I kind of grappled with that. I really wanted my children to have a firm educational foundation. I wanted them to be secure. So very early in their life, I chose all Black spiritual settings for them. But as they got older, I wanted them to be able to relate to people across other races other than Black. So my son's first experience in being minority was when he went to middle school, okay? And then he also transitioned to a predominantly white high school. So he had those kinds of experiences. And of course, we were very concerned about it, and we talked to him about it. At times he experienced discrimination. I can remember times when teachers would tell me that his name is Joshua, that he's raising his hand. He's not giving the other kids enough time to answer questions. He wants to know, why aren't there, any books by African-American authors on the reading list, So I would encounter those kinds of things with him, and what's interesting is that with him, he chose an HBCU over her, a historically Black college university for his education, because, he had the experience of being with, being a minority in a predominantly white environment. My daughter, on the other hand, ended up, staying in predominantly Black environments for most of her education. Things just changed in terms of the neighborhoods and the schools and the school systems. She, on the other hand, chose predominantly white institutions for her to go to school in. So, again, and I talked to her about that. What's it going to be like for you to be, the minority within a predominantly white setting? How can you be successful in that setting? So, with children, I think it's important very early on, I can't say that enough, to be able to develop an atmosphere of openness in terms of talking about race, in terms of talking about disparities, in terms of talking about discrimination.
Let me try to respond, Hunter, to one aspect of your question about what if you are a white parent who hasn't done as we're recommending today. And I'll stand up and say, I raised my daughter years ago, and I didn't address racism as directly as I would do today, and I'm playing catch up with my nephew. But anyway, I think so. If you're, the parent of an adolescent who's realizing, oh, I really haven't talked about this much, I think that's another situation where naming it is a good place to start, and just saying, and certainly teens are well aware of what's going on in our country right now, and probably pretty interested in it. They may have a variety of opinions, but so I'd say, start it by saying, I'm realizing we didn't talk about the racial situation in our country. We haven't talked about that much as a family, and I'm sort of thinking we should have talked about it more. How are you feeling about what's going on? What kind of, how do you think, have you seen things that you felt were racist in school? How'd you feel when you saw that?
Yeah.
So, I think that's a way to begin. Another important thing, as any parent of a teenager knows, is it's an especially important time not to get in a lecturing mode. So really to be asking a lot of questions to help your child express their feelings. Certainly if they're on a really different page than you are, you can express your feeling. But many teens have a very keen sense of justice. Sometimes, sometimes overly keen. So this is a time that's really an opportunity to shape, I think, concern and altruism, and, a social justice orientation. It is challenging for all of us in the age of COVID, because there's some things that we might want to do that are less easy to do right now. But
yeah, I wanted to take my daughters to a protest, but I was like, I don't know about the mask situation. And I'm normally like, I was at the Women's March in 2017, and I've taken them to women's marches in years since, and we haven't done this. And there's just a couple of the factors kind of holding us back, but I think I could have that conversation with my daughters. I mean, I am realizing that we didn't talk about it that much, even because I have Black nieces. We don't have to talk about it that much because this is in our family. Or I guess we had my sister-in-law gave me a book that, we had some books, but it wasn't about America. I think I feel more uncomfortable about America. Like, we have a great book called Africa is Not a Country, and it's wonderful about it's great. So we've talked about differences and people all around the world, and we've seen media and things like that. But I think probably I'd have to call myself out in that. I've definitely been uncomfortable about directly and not realizing how important it was to directly address this with my kids. And I mean, we talk about a lot of things verbally, but I guess I'm thinking also resource wise, that's such an easy way to start. And I kind of feel that's such an easy way to start, is when you have little kids, is with these resources. And it just wasn't something that was on my radar as an important thing. And I realize that's a privilege, for sure.
Yeah, and that just reminds me that one of the parts of our book that people really like is our note to parents and caregivers in the back of the book. It's an extensive section which provides all kinds of information related to resources and how to answer challenging questions. There role plays, quote unquote, between, when children come home and ask, why does, all the Black boys in class, they always get in trouble, why is that, so there's, if you're ever able to get a copy of the book, you will find that that caregiver note section, parent and caregiver note section, to be very, very helpful in terms of answering difficult questions, how to initiate conversations. And we also have online resources that are updated continually, again, with the most up-to-date resources and things to really kind of help people along this journey.
I think really for teenagers, while in one sense parents may feel intimidated that that's going to be a challenging conversation, it's really a great opportunity because teenagers love angst and strife, and there's nothing angstier than, you know, our history of racism in America. So you know, many teenagers, even obviously teenagers of color, this is often a time where this is really, you know, they're thinking of not only about themselves, but, you know, about their community. And but for white teenagers often are sensitive to, you know, typical adolescent issues. You're feeling so self-conscious. You're very sensitive about feeling victimized or feeling different. So they really can identify some with the plight of others that have not been treated fairly. So it's an opportunity to really join with your teenagers in discussing something that's interesting to them and feels important to them. You know, from lots of teenagers we hear when as therapists, you know, my parents don't talk about, you know, anything real. Everything's so, you know, superficial and materialistic. So this is a chance to talk about something real and to engage with your teen about something important.
I really appreciate everything that you're saying, and then I'm hoping, you know, dear listener, that you're getting some light bulbs along with me, that, you know, as parents of younger children, we can just really open up these conversations with resources or with just, you know, and part of it is for us parents, like, to, you know, to that awkwardness is, you know, get over it. Okay, you know, that's like a lame thing to say, but like, it's just like, that's gonna be there. That's gonna be part of it, right? That discomfort is gonna be part of it, but we can do hard things, and it's you know, taking the step to do hard things is what is required to change old patterns that aren't working, whether they're systemic in our country or whether they're in our families. Now, yeah, I guess my one other sort of question I had about this, thinking about who is listening and who is asking questions. I have a client whose husband is a police officer, and they are suffering enormously because of what's happening, and he just wants to go live on an island far away somewhere, I think. But I think I'm not sure that you would say that anything different would apply to families of law enforcement. There's still these conversations that we need to have in a lot of different ways. Is that what you would say?
Oh, I would agree 100%. And, you know, and also within our book, even though we talk about the fact that a policeman shot this Black man, we also make the point that all policemen are not bad. And, you know, even within the Black family, they talk about the fact that I think one of Mom's friends is a policewoman. And, but, you know, certainly no different for policemen. You know, we've had, you know, different people react, you know, to our book and said, you know, what are you saying about police officers here? But we really feel we're pretty nuanced, you know, in how we present that. I don't know if you had any comments, Anne.
Well, it is a challenge. Some people have asked, oh, did you have to start with a police shooting? And yes, we really felt like we did, because disproportionate police shootings have been the symbol and the reality of racism for Black families. And that's in part because they're a very visible arm of government, and they've been used to, you know, obviously they were used to enforce segregation back in the day. But we also know that being a policeman is a very tough job. Most policemen got into the job because they wanted to help people and help communities. Lots of little Black boys and Black girls want to grow up to be policemen and policewomen.
I hope they do.
So even though, you know, there's a very complex relationship between the Black and brown community and the police. But police need to treat people fairly, and that's one of the changes that needs to happen. But I mean, we do recognize that in some sense they become the symbol of everything that's wrong, and we need to not other police either. I mean, we all are. I think it's. I'm blanking on who. This is not my phrase. This is somebody else's brilliant phrase of that we all breathe the smog of racism. So we all have implicit bias, or the great majority of us do. The policemen just have a very tough job where that bias can get expressed in a way that means life or death for people. So they have to work on it really hard, and they have to have regulations and accountability that make it, difficult for that to get expressed in ways that kill people.
Yes.
So.
Well, Marietta and Anne, I am so grateful that you have come on the podcast and that you have done this work. Like your work, obviously, as people who care enormously about children and psychologists and the way you've presented it, especially in Something Happened in Our Town, is so beautiful. And I just really appreciate that you've shown the way you've shown up for children in honoring their hearts and their intelligence and they're wanting to be part of what's fair and what's right in the world, and you've done that in a really beautiful way.
Oh,
thank you so much, and thank you for
sure.
what you're doing to elevate parenting and to help parents parent from their hearts and nurture their children's hearts.
Oh, yes. I really appreciate the way that you said that, Hunter. It was beautiful.
Thank you so much for listening. I just want to let you know that their book, Something Happened in My Town, is so good, and you can order it and have it come in when the reprinting is done at Magination Press. It's like imagination without the I. It's Magination Press. So go to maginationpress.com to order Something Happened in My Town. And dear listener, I hope this episode has been helpful and informative for you, as it was for me. I feel that there's some really clear steps that we can take. We need to start conversations in our homes. We need to get more resources into our schools and even think about our own lives. It is time for us to step out of our comfort zone and start to reach across the divides, I think. I think this is really important. So if this episode has been helpful for you, please share it. Makes an enormous difference when you take a little screenshot on your phone and post it up on your Facebook or Instagram and tell people about what you're learning and give people this resource. I know it helps enormously, and word of mouth is the best. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope this sparks some conversations. And I thank you so, so very much for listening. I'm wishing you peace. I'm wishing you health and wellness and some joy and laughter and all that good stuff. Thank you so much for listening, my friend. Namaste. Are you a mom who wants to feel less stressed and enjoy motherhood more? Do you want to be calmer with your kids and be more present for life? I've gone from being stressed and yelling to become more grounded, more at ease, and have more enjoyable, cooperative relationships with my kids. I'm going to show you how to do it too. If you currently feel stuck or stagnant, this is for you. I've created a free, downloadable audio training, Mindfulness for Moms, the Superpower You Need. It will show you how to respond rather than react, how to let go of stress and feel more grounded in seconds, how to have a smoother day today and become more present for your kids. To get this absolutely free, simply visit the website mindfulmomguide.com. That's mindfulmomguide.com. Get started with mindfulness, the superpower moms need. I'll see you there.